Summer 39 AD, on the Italian coast of Baiae, a man who ruled Galilee for more than 40 years is about to lose everything in a single audience. The Emperor Caligula stares at him with ice-cold eyes as he reads aloud accusations of treason. This is the story of the end of Herod Antipas, the man who beheaded a prophet and mocked the Messiah. And today, we are going to reconstruct it using artificial intelligence. He was not a king, he never was, though many called him that out of habit or flattery. He was a tetrarch, governor of a quarter of the kingdom that his father, Herod the Great, had ruled with an iron fist. But that lesser title was never enough for him, and certainly not for the woman who shared his bed. Herod Antipas carried in his veins the Idumean blood of his father and the Samaritan blood of his mother, Malthus. He was heir not only to territories, but to an ancestral paranoia, one that had driven Herod the Great to murder his own wife and sons out of fear of conspiracies. That same dark shadow would follow Antipas all the way to his final days. 2 crimes marked his biography with indelible ink. The first, ordering the beheading of John the Baptist, the prophet of the desert, whose voice had electrified all of Judea with a message of repentance. The second, more subtle but equally devastating, mocking Jesus of Nazareth during his trial, dressing him in a robe of ridicule, and sending him back to Pilate as though he were nothing more than a failed entertainment. His downfall did not come like an immediate bolt of divine lightning. It came like the slow but relentless erosion of water on rock. A war lost against the Nabateans, the toxic envy of an ambitious woman, and finally, a catastrophic political miscalculation before a paranoid and capricious emperor named Caligula. To understand the fall of Antipas, we must first understand the broader stage upon which his final tragedy unfolded. In the year 39 AD, the Roman Empire stretched from Britannia in the north to Egypt in the south, from Hispania in the west to Syria in the east. It was the undisputed superpower of the Mediterranean world, and on its throne sat Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known by his childhood nickname Caligula, Little Boots, named after the small military sandals he wore as a boy in the legionary camps. Caligula had risen to power just 3 years earlier in 37 AD, following the death of Tiberius. The first months were promising: amnesties, public games, generosity toward the people, but a serious illness that very same year transformed him. When he recovered, he was no longer the same man. Paranoia, capricious cruelty, and delusions of divinity began to manifest themselves with ever greater intensity. This was the man before whom Antipas would have to appear and defend his loyalty. An emperor who had ordered senators executed on a whim, who planned to appoint his favorite horse as consul, who demanded to be worshipped as a living god. A man unpredictable, dangerous, and absolutely all-powerful. The political chessboard of the East was especially complex. Rome did not govern every province directly, but instead used a mixture of Roman governors and local client kings, who maintained order under imperial supervision. Antipas had been one of those client kings for decades, skillfully navigating the turbulent waters of Roman politics. But the rules of the game were changing rapidly under Caligula. To understand who Antipas truly was, we must go back one generation to Herod the Great, builder of temples and murderer of the innocent children of Bethlehem. Herod the Great had been one of the most effective rulers Rome had ever had in the East. He built entire cities, expanded the Temple of Jerusalem until it became one of the great architectural wonders of the ancient world, and maintained peace in a notoriously difficult region. But he was also a paranoid tyrant who saw conspiracies lurking in every shadow. He had 10 wives and at least 15 known children, and in his final years, consumed by illness and paranoia, he executed 3 of them on suspicions of treason: Alexander and Aristobulus, sons of the Hasmonean princess Mariamne, and finally Antipater, his designated heir, just 5 days before his own death. Emperor Augustus, upon hearing of it, remarked with bitter irony, "It is better to be Herod's pig than his son." It was a cutting play on words. Herod, being Jewish, or at least appearing so, did not eat pork. But his sons he devoured without mercy. When Herod the Great died in 4 BC, his kingdom was divided among 3 of his surviving sons. Archelaus received Judea, Samaria, and Idumea with the title of ethnarch. Herod Philip II received the territories of the northeast, Iturea, Trachonitis, Gaulonitis, and Herod Antipas, the shrewdest of the 3, received Galilee and Perea. It was not the largest portion, but it was the wealthiest and most populated after Judea. And unlike his brother Archelaus, who was deposed by Rome just 10 years later for brutal incompetence, Antipas knew how to play the game. He held on to power for more than 40 years, until his ambition, or more precisely the ambition of his wife, destroyed him. Galilee was not Judea. This distinction is absolutely fundamental to understanding both the world of Antipas and the ministry of Jesus. While Judea was the religious heart of Judaism, home to the temple and center of strict religious orthodoxy, Galilee was a more plural region, more open to international trade, more exposed to Hellenistic and Gentile influences. The old dismissive phrase, "no prophet arises from Galilee," reflected the prejudice of southern Jews toward their brothers in the north. The geography of Galilee was diverse and fertile. To the west, the coastal plains descended toward the Mediterranean. To the east, the hills dropped dramatically toward the Sea of Galilee, a freshwater lake teeming with fishing activity. To the north, the mountains of Lebanon rose majestically, and to the south, the plain of Jezreel spread out like a green carpet. The population was majority Jewish, yes, but there were also Greek, Phoenician, and Syrian communities. The cities that Antipas built or rebuilt, especially Sepphoris and Tiberias, had a deliberately Hellenistic character. Theaters, hippodromes, public buildings in the Greco-Roman style, statues. This was the impossible balance Antipas tried to maintain, governing a conservative Jewish population while satisfying the cultural expectations of Rome. Building like a Hellenistic king while respecting, at least in appearance, the law of Moses, being Jewish enough for his subjects and Roman enough for his superiors. For decades, he managed it. But that balance was inherently unstable, and the cracks would begin to appear precisely where his personal life and his religious obligations collided, in the most explosive way imaginable. In the year 20 AD, Antipas decided to build a new capital for his tetrarchy. He would call it Tiberius in honor of Emperor Tiberius, a calculated gesture of flattery designed to guarantee him continued favor in Rome. He chose a spectacular site on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, with panoramic views over the lake and direct access to the trade routes connecting Damascus with the Mediterranean coast. Nearby, natural hot springs could attract elite tourism. Everything seemed perfect, except for one catastrophic detail. The site had once been an ancient cemetery. Under Jewish law, walking over a cemetery, let alone building on top of one, created severe ritual impurity. No observant Jew would want to live there. Antipas knew this, and yet he proceeded anyway, blinded by the architectural grandeur of his vision. When the construction was completed, with magnificent palaces, marble public baths, a stadium for races, imposing walls, he was forced to compel people to live there. He offered free land, homes built at no cost, tax exemptions. He brought in freed slaves, foreigners, anyone willing to settle there. But pious Jews avoided the city as though it were a plague. Tiberius became the perfect symbol of Antipas's ambition, magnificently built, strategically located, but spiritually cursed in the eyes of his own people. It was a beautiful city, inhabited by people who either had no other choice or simply did not care about the laws of purity. It is significant that Jesus, who walked through practically every village around the Sea of Galilee, preaching and healing, never once set foot in Tiberias, according to the gospel records. The city of Antipas did not deserve his presence. If Tiberius was the architectural sin of Antipas, Herodias was his carnal and political sin, the one that would ultimately destroy him. Herodias was his niece, granddaughter of Herod the Great, and she was married to his half-brother Herod Philip, not the Tetrarch, but another son of Herod the Great, who lived as a private citizen in Rome. From that marriage, a daughter had been born, Salome. During a visit to Rome, probably in the late 20s AD, Antipas met Herodias. What happened between them was more than physical attraction. It was a mutual recognition of ambition. Herodias was married to a man with no political power. Antipas was married to the daughter of King Aretas IV of Nabatea, a diplomatic marriage, utterly devoid of passion. They made a pact. Antipas would divorce the Nabatean princess and marry Herodias. She would leave Herod Philip. Together, they would build a greater dynastic power. But there were several massive legal and moral problems with this plan. First, according to Jewish law, a man could not marry his brother's wife while that brother was still alive. The levirate exception only applied if the brother had died without children. Second, Herodias was his niece, which also raised serious issues of consanguinity. Third, there was the diplomatic matter of repudiating the daughter of a powerful king. The Nabatean princess, upon discovering the plan, fled back to her father in Petra. The humiliation was total. She had not only been cast aside, but replaced by a woman who was simultaneously her husband's niece and his sister-in-law. Antipas proceeded anyway. He married Herodias in a ceremony that scandalized Jewish society. The Pharisees muttered among themselves, The common people were horrified, but Antipas had the political power to ignore the criticism until a voice began to cry out from the desert, a voice that could not be silenced with money or threats. The voice of John. John, son of Zechariah, was everything that Antipas was not. Austere, where Antipas was lavish; direct, where Antipas was calculating; free, where Antipas was a prisoner of his own political compromises. He wore camel's hair, ate locusts and wild honey, and lived in the Judean desert near the Jordan River. But his message had sparked a mass movement that terrified the authorities both in Jerusalem and in Galilee. Thousands flocked to the river to be baptized by him as a sign of repentance. His preaching was like fire. "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Bear fruit worthy of repentance." He showed no favoritism. He confronted the Pharisees for their hypocrisy. He confronted soldiers for their extortion. He confronted tax collectors for their corruption. And when the rumors began to spread about the scandalous marriage of Antipas and Herodias, John did what no courtier would ever have dared. He denounced it publicly. "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." It was not a private criticism whispered in a corner. It was a public declaration, repeated again and again before the crowds who came to hear him. John was accusing the Tetrarch of Galilee of adultery, incest, and violation of the law of Moses. Antipas had three options: ignore it and appear weak, respond with arguments and enter a public debate he could not win, or silence him by force. Herodias left him no room to hesitate about which one to choose. John was arrested and imprisoned in the fortress of Machaerus, a palace prison in the mountains east of the Dead Sea. But even behind bars, his voice continued to echo in the conscience of Antipas. The Gospels tell us that Antipas liked to listen to him, and that he protected him because he knew John was a righteous and holy man. It was a toxic and complex relationship. The ruler, fascinated and terrified by the prophet who condemned him. Antipas wanted to silence him, but did not dare to kill him. Herodias waited for her moment. And that moment would come on a night of wine, music, and reckless promises. The Gospel of Mark preserves for us the details of that night, the night that sealed John's fate and marked Antipas forever. It was Antipas's birthday, most likely celebrated at Machaerus itself, where John was being held prisoner. The great men of Galilee were present: military officers, leading figures of the court, civic leaders. The wine flowed freely. The atmosphere was one of unbridled celebration, far removed from the austerity that Jewish law would have prescribed. Then Salome entered, the daughter of Herodias, most likely a young teenager, and she danced before Antipas and his guests. This was no innocent ceremonial dance. The Greek text suggests it was provocative, designed to seduce. And it worked perfectly. Antipas, intoxicated by wine and the spectacle before him, made the most foolish promise of his life. "Ask me for whatever you want, and I will give it to you. Whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom." It was a kind of grandiose and hollow promise that powerful men make when they want to impress. He expected her to ask for jewels, fine garments, money. Salome stepped out to consult with her mother, and Herodias, who had been waiting for exactly this moment, knew precisely what to ask for. The head of John the Baptist. Salome returned immediately with the request, adding a macabre note of urgency. I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Mark tells us that Antipas was deeply grieved. He knew it was a trap. He knew he was making a terrible mistake. But because of his oath and because of his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. And here is the perfect portrait of Antipas, a man without the courage of his own convictions, a weak ruler manipulated by a vengeful woman, a politician more concerned with his image before his guests than with justice. The order was given. The executioner descended to the dungeon, and moments later, on a silver platter, the head of John the Baptist was presented to Salome, who carried it to her mother. The voice of the desert had been silenced, but the echo of his blood had only just begun to sound. The death of John brought Antipas no peace. It brought him something far worse, obsessive guilt and supernatural dread. When John's disciples came to collect the headless body for burial, the news spread like wildfire across the entire region. The Jewish people were horrified. John had been widely recognized as a prophet. Many believed he was the forerunner of the promised Messiah. His execution was not seen as justice, but as the murder of a holy man. And then rumors began to circulate about another itinerant preacher from Galilee, Jesus of Nazareth. He performed miracles even more extraordinary than John's. His teachings drew even greater crowds, and some began to whisper, "It is John the Baptist, risen from the dead." When these rumors reached the ears of Antipas, his reaction was one of pure terror. I had John beheaded, so who then is this man I am hearing such things about? The logic of the guilty man. I killed John, so he must be dead. But if he is performing miracles, does that mean he has returned from the grave to haunt me? The Herodian paranoia inherited from his father was manifesting itself in full force. Antipas wanted to see Jesus, not to believe in him, but to confirm whether or not he was the ghost of John returned to torment him. Luke tells us explicitly, and he sought to see him. But Jesus deliberately avoided him. And when the Pharisees finally came to warn him that Antipas wanted to kill him, Jesus' response was devastating in its contempt. Go and tell that fox, not the tetrarch, not the ruler, a fox, an animal considered cunning but cowardly, destructive but weak. It was the most precise assessment that could ever be made of Antipas. The encounter that Antipas had so desperately wanted finally came, but not under the circumstances he would have chosen. It was the morning of Passover in the year 33 AD. Jesus had been arrested in Gethsemane, interrogated by the Sanhedrin, and brought before Pilate. And Pilate, upon discovering that Jesus was a Galilean, and therefore under the jurisdiction of Antipas, saw a golden political opportunity: transfer the problem to Antipas, who happened to be in Jerusalem for the festival. Luke preserves the details for us. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. He had heard many things about him and hoped to see him perform some miracle. He did not come with humility of heart. He came with the curiosity of a man seeking entertainment. He wanted a spectacle. He wanted magic on demand. He wanted to confirm or dismiss his superstitious fears about a risen John. And he questioned him at great length. question after question. Who are you? Are you John? Perform a miracle. Show me your power. Speak. Say something. And Jesus, who had spoken extensively with Pilate, who had debated with the Pharisees, who had taught the crowds for 3 years, gave Antipas the most devastating gift imaginable: absolute silence. But Jesus gave him no answer, not a single word, not even a glance of acknowledgement, as if Antipas were transparent, non-existent, not even worthy of a response. The King of the universe stood before the Tetrarch of Galilee, and the Tetrarch did not even merit his verbal contempt. The humiliation must have been unbearable for Antipas. The chief priests who had accompanied him were vehemently accusing him, waiting for Antipas to do something, to show authority, to condemn this troublesome rabbi. But faced with that unshakable silence, Antipas did the only thing he knew how to do when he felt powerless. He mocked. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him, dressing him in an elegant robe, a royal robe of mockery, as if to say, if you claim to be a king, then dress like one. And then he sent him back to Pilate. He pronounced no sentence. He did not condemn him. He did not release him. He simply washed his hands of the entire matter, exactly as Pilate himself would do shortly after. Luke adds a fascinating detail. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends because before this, they had been enemies, united in their shared guilt, united in their mutual cowardice, united in their complicity in the execution of the only truly innocent man either of them had ever known. While Antipas continued his life of luxury in Tiberias, perhaps believing he had escaped the consequences of his crimes. A storm was gathering on the other side of the desert. Aretas IV, king of the Nabateans, ruling from his capital in Petra, had not forgotten the humiliation of his daughter. For years, he had waited for the right moment, and that moment came around 36 AD, when border tensions between Perea, Antipas's territory, and Nabatea erupted into open conflict. The Nabateans were desert warriors, hardened by generations of survival in one of the most hostile environments on earth. They knew every mountain pass, every hidden water source, every trade route. Their army descended upon the forces of Antipas like an avalanche. The battle was devastating and decisive. The army of Antipas was completely destroyed. It was not simply a defeat. It was a total military humiliation. Professional soldiers, men who were supposed to protect Galilee and Perea, were wiped out by the men of the desert. And here is where the story becomes deeply revealing about how the Jewish people interpreted these events. Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian writing just decades later, records this crucial observation. But some of the Jews thought that the destruction of Herod's army came from God, and that very justly, as a punishment for what he had done against John, called the Baptist. The people read political and military events through theological eyes. They did not simply see a war lost through military incompetence. They saw divine judgment being carried out in real time. They saw God himself fighting on the side of Aretas as an instrument of vengeance for the blood of the prophet. Antipas, desperate, appealed to Rome. The Emperor Tiberius, who had been his protector for decades, ordered the governor of Syria, Vitellius, to march against Aretas. But Vitellius moved slowly, deliberately, slowly. Before he could intervene, Tiberius died in 37 A.D., with a new emperor in Rome, Caligula, and a new balance of power. The protection Antipas had enjoyed for 40 years began to evaporate. And into that power vacuum stepped a rival far more dangerous than Aretas, his own political nephew. If Antipas represented the old generation of the Herodian dynasty, cautious, calculating, preoccupied with stability, Herod Agrippa I represented something entirely different, a reckless gambler willing to risk everything. Agrippa was the grandson of Herod the Great through his executed son Aristobulus and the brother of Herodias. He had grown up in Rome, educated alongside the sons of the imperial elite. His closest childhood friend was none other than Gaius, the future Caligula. But Agrippa was a legendary spendthrift. He burned through his entire inheritance on extravagant parties, bribes, and failed attempts to secure political positions. At one point, he was so deeply in debt that he had to flee Rome to escape his creditors. He returned to Judea literally bankrupt, where his sister Herodias and her husband Antipas gave him a minor post in Tiberias, market supervisor. The humiliation of being employed by his brother-in-law, of depending on his sister's charity, ate away at him. After a very public argument with Antipas, Agrippa fled again, this time back to Rome, where he borrowed more money and staked everything on one final political gamble. He sought out his old friend Gaius and began to cultivate that friendship obsessively. One day, during a private conversation in a carriage, Agrippa casually remarked that he hoped Gaius would soon replace the aging Tiberius as emperor. It was a verbal act of treason, a death wish spoken aloud against the reigning emperor, and someone heard it and reported it. Agrippa was immediately imprisoned, put in chains, and seemed destined for execution on charges of treason. But then, 6 months later, Tiberius died. Gaius, now Caligula, ascended to the throne, and one of his very first acts was to free his friend Agrippa, present him with a gold chain equal in weight to the iron chains he had worn in prison, and name him king over the former territories of Herod Philip, Iturea, and Trachonitis. King, not tetrarch. King, the title that Antipas had never received in 40 years of loyal service. When news reached Tiberius that Agrippa, the spendthrift, the debtor, the refugee who had once worked as a minor employee in their own court, now held a higher title than his own, something broke inside Herodias. Herodias could not bear it. Her brother, the man she had rescued from poverty, was now a king, while she remained nothing more than the wife of a tetrarch. She launched a relentless campaign of pressure on Antipas. "You must go to Rome. You must ask Caligula to name you king. You have served faithfully for more than 40 years. You have kept the peace. You have built cities. You deserve that title just as much as Agrippa, if not more." Antipas resisted. He knew the risks. He was already an old man, probably in his 60s. He had survived decades in the dangerous world of Roman politics precisely because he knew when to be ambitious and when to be discreet. Going to Rome to demand a higher title was dangerous, especially under an emperor as unpredictable as Caligula, but Herodias was relentless. The same determination that had driven her to abandon her first husband, the same cold calculation that had led her to demand the head of John the Baptist, now focused itself on one single obsession: to be called queen. Finally, Antipas gave in. It was the pattern of his life, yielding to the pressure of others at crucial moments. He had yielded to Herodias when they married. He had yielded to Salome when she asked for the head of John. And now he yielded once again to his wife's ambition. They assembled an impressive fleet loaded with treasures to dazzle Caligula: gold, silver, purple garments, spices. They sailed from Palestine toward Italy, most likely in the summer of 39 AD. What they did not know was that Agrippa, the brother of Herodias, the very man who owed his original position to their generosity, had already sent letters ahead of them, letters filled with devastating accusations. Caligula was not in Rome when Antipas arrived. He was in Baiae, a luxury resort on the coast north of Naples, where the Roman aristocracy kept splendid seaside villas. It was an appropriately ironic setting. Two men who had surrounded themselves with luxury their entire lives, meeting in the very epitome of Roman imperial extravagance. But only one of them held any real power. The audience was granted. Antipas was admitted into the presence of Caligula. He paid his respects, offered his magnificent gifts, and began to present his case for why he deserved the title of king. And then Caligula interrupted. He had received letters from Herod Agrippa, letters containing very serious accusations. The accusations were specific and devastating. Antipas had allegedly stockpiled a secret arsenal of weapons, enough to arm 70,000 men. And even worse, he had entered into secret negotiations with Artabanus III of Parthia, Rome's mortal enemy in the east, possibly conspiring against imperial interests. Antipas denied everything, but Caligula asked the fatal question, "Do you have weapons stored for 70,000 men?" And here, Antipas made the fatal mistake. He could have lied outright. He could have said it was a complete fabrication by Agrippa, but instead, he partially admitted the truth. Yes, he had arsenals, but they were for the legitimate defense of his territory, not for rebellion. The confession, though partial, was enough. Caligula had no interest in nuance or explanation. In his paranoid mind, possessing weapons in that quantity was equivalent to preparing for revolt. The sentence was delivered with the casual coldness of a man crushing an insect. The tetrarchy of Galilee and Perea was immediately confiscated and handed over to Herod Agrippa. Antipas was stripped of all his titles, all his properties, all his wealth, and he was condemned to permanent exile in Lugdunum, in Gaul, on the remote fringes of the empire. 43 years of rule ended in a conversation that lasted minutes. But Caligula added one revealing detail. Looking at Herodias, he said, "You are the sister of Agrippa, my friend. Therefore, I grant you the mercy of keeping your property and not sharing in your husband's exile." It was an extraordinary offer. She could stay. She could keep her wealth. She could live comfortably in Rome or return to Palestine under her brother's protection. All she had to do was abandon Antipas. Flavius Josephus records her response with what can only be described as a hint of reluctant admiration. But she replied, "You do me a kindness, O Emperor, in allowing me to keep what is mine, but my love for my husband does not allow me to abandon him in his misfortune. I therefore ask to share his exile." Caligula, perhaps surprised by this unexpected loyalty, granted her wish with contempt. Then accompany your husband into banishment, and carry with you the misery you have chosen. It is a morally complex moment. On one hand, it is a genuine act of marital loyalty. Herodias could have saved her social standing and her wealth. She chose poverty and exile out of love, or at least out of commitment, to Antipas. But on the other hand, it was precisely Herodias' ambition that had destroyed them both. If she had not pressured Antipas to go to Rome, they would still be ruling quietly in Galilee. Her loyalty at the end was simply accepting the consequences of her own greed. It was loyalty, yes, but loyalty in sin. Loyalty between two people who had broken the law of God to be together, who had murdered a prophet to silence their own conscience, who had mocked the Messiah out of pride, and now they would share the punishment together. Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon in France, was a frontier outpost on the edges of the civilized empire. Beyond Gaul lay the barbarian tribes of Germania, considered the very boundary of the known world. For someone who had spent his entire life in the eastern Mediterranean, in the warm climate of Galilee, in palaces overlooking a shimmering lake, exile in Gaul must have been a total and traumatic shock. The climate was cold and damp. The food was different. The language was incomprehensible. There were no synagogues, no theological debates, no court intrigues to manipulate. Only gray existence, day after day. We do not know exactly how long Antipas lived in exile. The historical sources are almost completely silent about his final years. Flavius Josephus mentions the exile, but does not record his death. There was no state funeral, no monuments, no inscriptions carved in marble celebrating his achievements. The man who had governed one of the most important territories in Palestine for more than 4 decades simply vanished from history. He died in obscurity, far from the land he had ruled, forgotten by everyone except perhaps by the woman who shared his exile. Meanwhile, in Palestine, Herod Agrippa I was consolidating his power. He would eventually rule all the territories his grandfather, Herod the Great, had controlled. But his glory would also be brief. He died just 3 years later, in 44 A.D., eaten by worms according to the book of Acts, in a divine judgment as dramatic as anything in the Old Testament. The Herodian dynasty would continue for another generation, but its real power had ended. Rome would govern Judea directly, until in 70 A.D., Titus razed Jerusalem and the temple, fulfilling exactly the prophecy Jesus had spoken 40 years before. There is a historical irony so profound it seems divinely designed. In the year 39 A.D., when Antipas lost his kingdom and was sent into exile, the early church was experiencing its first great expansion. The apostles Antipas had ignored. The message of Jesus he had answered with mockery. The resurrection he never believed were transforming the Mediterranean world. Peter was preaching in Judea and would eventually reach Rome. Paul, newly converted after his experience on the road to Damascus, was being prepared for a ministry that would carry the gospel to Asia Minor, to Greece, and eventually to the very heart of the empire. Communities of believers were multiplying in Jerusalem, in Antioch, in Damascus, in Caesarea. The book of Acts records that the word of God grew and multiplied. Antipas had political power. Jesus had nowhere to lay his head. Antipas had palaces. Jesus was crucified as a common criminal. Antipas ruled for 43 years. The public ministry of Jesus lasted barely 3. But by the year 39 A.D., it was brutally clear who had truly won. The kingdom of Antipas had been torn away and given to another. The kingdom of God that Jesus proclaimed was conquering hearts throughout the known empire. By the year 100 A.D., barely 60 years after the exile of Antipas, there were Christian communities from Spain to Mesopotamia, from Britannia to Egypt. By 313 A.D., the Emperor Constantine would legalize Christianity, and by 380 A.D., it would become the official religion of the Roman Empire. The name of Herod Antipas survived in history only because the Gospels mentioned him. If not for his connection to John the Baptist and Jesus, he would be nothing more than a footnote in the Chronicles of Josephus, as forgotten as dozens of other minor rulers of Roman provinces. While the men he killed and humiliated, John the Baptist and Jesus of Nazareth, would be venerated by billions of people across 2,000 years. Close your eyes for a moment. You are in Baiae, on the Italian coast. The scent of the Mediterranean Sea fills the air. You can hear the waves breaking softly against the rocks. The sun is high and warm. Antipas stands before Caligula. He has brought magnificent gifts: gold, silver, purple cloth, incense. He has rehearsed his speech. He is confident that 43 years of loyal service have earned him the right to a greater title. And then he hears the accusations. He sees the cold gaze of the emperor. He feels everything he has built over decades crumbling in minutes. Power, wealth, prestige, position, all stripped away with a few casual words from a capricious emperor. Behind him, in his memory, are the voices he chose to ignore. The voice of John crying out from the desert, "It is not lawful for you." The even more eloquent silence of Jesus, refusing to even speak to him. The warnings of his own conscience, smothered under layers of political rationalization. Now, all that remains for him is a journey northward, toward cold and foreign lands, toward oblivion. Open your eyes. You are no longer in the year 39 A.D. You are here now in your own time. But the question remains, how many prophetic voices have you silenced? How many divine warnings have you ignored because they interfered with your ambitions? What temporary kingdoms are you building while despising eternal realities? Antipas had everything and lost everything. Jesus had nothing by the world's standards and won an eternal kingdom. The question is not what title you will hold tomorrow. The question is this: before whom will you kneel when everything temporary has been stripped away and only the eternal remains?